Okay, 7.4, this is finding zeros of quadratic functions. Okay, there are three different ways we're going to go about doing this. By factoring, by using the quadratic formula, and then definitely highly recommend having the quad program on your calculator, and you'll see why in just a moment. Your first problem will look something like this. It'll say f of c equals c squared plus 8c plus 15. So when we're finding zeros of these quadratic functions, we are finding where the parabola, which is what a quadratic function makes on the graph, we are finding where it crosses through the x-axis. These are either called zeros, they could be called solutions, they could be called x-intercepts. All that terminology all means the same thing, where the parabola crosses through the x-axis. The first way we can do that is if you're looking at your function and it is factorable, you want to set it equal to 0 and see if it's factorable. This one is factorable, so if I factor this trinomial, I'll have c and c for c squared. Factors of 15 that add to 8 would be a positive 5 and a positive 3. So you would do the factoring and then set each factor equal to 0. So c plus 5 equals 0 and c plus 3 equals 0 and solve them for c. So in this one I would subtract 5 from both sides to get c equals negative 5. And on this one I would subtract 3 from both sides to get c equals negative 3. So negative 5 and negative 3 are the zeros or solutions of the function. So that's how you would do it by factoring. Now, the second method we're going to talk about is by using the quadratic formula, and it's for problems like number 2. Number 2, the function is f of x equals x squared minus 14x minus 4. So again, I need to set this equal to 0, x squared minus 14x minus 4 equals 0. Now, here's the issue that we would run into if we tried to factor this. If I tried to factor x and x, I would run into a stumbling block because I cannot find factors of negative 4 that add to negative 14, which means factoring is just not an option to find the solutions. Which means then I can go to the quadratic formula. Which is the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and put that all over 2a. Okay, so now we'll go back and we'll find out what our a, b, and c are. So let's see if we have x squared minus 14x minus 4 equals 0. Your a is the number in front of x squared, which is represented by a 1 here. That would be 1x squared. Your b is the number in front of your x, so in this case it would be negative 14. And then your c is your constant, which is this number here at the end. So in this case, negative 4. So now we're going to plug those numbers wherever we see the a, b, and c in this formula. So the formula starts off with the opposite of b. Well, if my b is negative 14, then the opposite of it would be positive 14. Then we have the plus minus. Then you're going to have this long radical. Underneath the radical, the next thing you're going to have is your b, but you want to square it. So negative 14 squared, which just means negative 14 times negative 14, make sure I don't get it wrong, gives me 196. So after the b squared, then you'll have this negative 4 that's always there. It's just part of the formula. Then your a and c. Okay, that comes after the negative 4. Well, your a is 1. Your c is negative 4. Then you're going to put that all over 2 times whatever your a is. In this case, it would be a 1. Now, here's the thing with the quadratic formula. I've got to simplify this mess of a fraction. So first of all, let's see what this ends up being underneath here. So I have 14 plus or minus. So let's just type all of that into my calculator. So I'm going to have 196 minus 4 times 1 times -4. So exactly like it is, that's exactly what I'm going to type in and see what that gives me. Well, that gives me 212. So now I've got 212 underneath that radical. Put that all over 2 times 1, which is 2. Now, here's the thing. That 212 is going to simplify because if you have a radical and there is a factor of this radical that is a perfect square. Let's divide 212 divided by 4, which gives me 53, which means this does have, I was using 4 since it was even. I was going to try to see if the perfect square of 4 goes into it, and it does, which means I have to simplify this. So I have 14 plus or minus. That 212 will break up into 4 times, and if you notice when we divided it by that 4, it gave me 53. Still all over 2. Now, the reason we had to simplify this is because this perfect square radical will now turn into just a plain number because the square root of 4 is just 2. So now I have 14 plus or minus 2 square roots of 53 all over 2. Now, we're almost done. We have one more step because after you simplify your radical like we did on the last step, you're looking at these 3 numbers right here. If the same number goes into all those, then that fraction will reduce. Since 2 goes into all 3 of those numbers, I need to divide them all by 2, which makes this a 7, that a 1, and that a 1. So I divided all those by 2, which leaves me now with 7 plus or minus. So now since that's a 1 square root of 53, I just need to write the square root of 53. And now your denominator is just a 1, which means I don't even need it. So your answers would be 7 plus and minus the square root of 53. Now, if you have the quad program on your calculator, let me show you what would happen at this point right here. It would be, if you have it, it'll be under this program button. So when I hit program, the very first program I have on my calculator is the quad program. So hit enter. So it'll come up and it'll look like that. It'll say program quad. Since that's what you want to do, you hit enter. Look, it asks what your A is. My A was 1. Then it asks what your B is. My B is -14. Then it asks what your C is. My C was -4. So now when I hit enter, it gives me that answer first, which we're going to have some of those in a little bit where we're going to want to see that. But if I hit enter again, there's your answer that you had to do all of this work to find. All this work to get 7 plus and minus the square root of 53. If you have the quad program on your calculator, there's your 7 plus and 7 minus the square root of 53. It does all of this tedious work right here for you. If you do not have the quad program on your calculator, I highly suggest that you find somebody that does. If not, you can go to the tutoring lab on the 3rd floor of the campus center building. It's called the LAC. And look for Richard Page. He is a tutor in there, and he has all the programs that you could ever possibly imagine on his computer there in the campus center. So make sure, you may want to call up there to the Camp LAC, the Learning Assistance Center in the Campus Center building on the main campus, and ask for Richard Page and see when he's going to be there, and then go up there and he can give you the program. Because if you have the program, it'll answer all of these problems in section 4 for you. Okay, so I just worked number 1 and number 2. Now let's look at number 3. It says find, anytime it says find the zeros and it's an x squared function, that's when you use the quad program. So program quad, your A, which is the number in front of x squared, is a 1. Your B, which is the number in front of x, which is a 5. And your C, which is your constant, this number at the end, which is -3. Now, if you'll notice, it'll say, now, this has 2 different solutions. It wants the exact solutions, and then it wants the approximate solutions, which is actually this first answer that it gives you. And it wants you to round it to 3 decimal places. So the approximate solutions will actually come into the second part. So the first one would be 0.541. Since the next number is a 3, that means I just do not need to round up the 1. So there's the first solution, comma. The second solution is this next one, so -5.541. So again, it wants you to round it to 3 decimal places, which is what I did. I went all the way to the 1, and then the 3 told me I didn't need to round up the 1. I only round up this 1 to a 2 if this number behind it is 5 or greater. So those are the approximate solutions. Now, when you hit enter again, that's the exact solutions, which is actually what your first answer would be. Okay, so you'll have just the negative, and it'll let you do it all together. Plus minus the square root of 37 over 2, which is what would be in your calculator. When you're typing this in My Math Lab, or My Labs Plus, excuse me, this plus and minus will be down there at the bottom where you can, in your tool section, where there'll be a little plus minus button, so you don't have to type the 2 answers in separately. You can hit that plus minus button and just put them together. Okay, number 4. Now, be careful here. Before you find the zeros, let me write this one out on the paper. So you'll have f of x equals 2x squared minus x plus 9. Again, you can just use that quad program. All you need to know to use the quad program is the A, B, and C. Well, A is 2. B is this number in front of x, which is represented by that -1. And C is the constant, so it'll be 9. Again, you can just punch those into your quad program. So go to Program, Quad. A is 2, B is -1, and C is 9. Okay, so there, since those came out as I's, this right here, it's not going to ask you for approximate solutions. These answers right here are just 1. Oh, sorry about that glare. 1 plus and minus I square root of 71 over 4 is what you would put in for your zeros are. All right, let's do one more. Since now we're just using the quad program, it's just doing the same thing again. So let's clear that out. Let's do number 5. Program, quad, enter. My A is 5. My B is -5. And my C is -7. So there's my approximate solutions. So this one I would have 1.784, except the number after the 4 is a 5. And since it wants me to stop the answer after 3 decimals, which is at this 4, you need to make sure that you use this 5 to round that 4 up to a 5. So your first approximate solution would be 1.785. And then your second approximate solution would be this bottom one, negative 0.78. Again, you would need to round that 4 up to a 5. So negative 0.785. Now for your exact solutions, just hit the enter button again to get 5 plus and minus the square root of 165 over 10.